At 62 years old, I thought I'd seen every shade of heartbreak a mother could endure. I was wrong. The moment my daughter Jessica called me after 3 years of silence, her voice dripping with false sweetness, asking if we could finally talk, I felt something twist in my chest. Not hope, I'd buried that long ago. It was dread. The kind that comes from knowing someone only reaches out when they need something. And I was right. What she needed was $80,000 to pay for a wedding I was never invited to. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Patricia Cole, and I raised Jessica as a single mother in Columbus, Ohio. Her father walked out when she was 2, leaving me with a mortgage, a toddler, and a job as a paralegal that barely covered our bills. I worked doubles, weekends, holidays. I missed her school plays because I was typing briefs at midnight. I skipped meals so she could have dance lessons. Every sacrifice felt worth it because Jessica was my world, my reason for pushing through the exhaustion and loneliness. She was bright, ambitious, beautiful. I told myself that one day she'd understand what I'd given up for her. The distance between us started when she went to college at Northwestern. Suddenly I wasn't good enough. My accent was too working class. My clothes weren't fashionable. When she brought home her roommate Vanessa for Thanksgiving her sophomore year, I watched Jessica cringe every time I spoke. Vanessa came from old money in Connecticut, the kind of family that summered in the Hamptons and wintered in Aspen. Jessica started changing her speech patterns, dropping references to our neighborhood, inventing a more palatable version of her childhood. After graduation, she moved to Manhattan and got a job at a prestigious marketing firm. Our phone calls became monthly, then quarterly, then nearly non-existent. She was always too busy, always had somewhere more important to be. When I suggested visiting, she'd make excuses about her tiny apartment, her demanding schedule, her need to focus on her career. The last time I saw her in person was 4 years ago at my sister's funeral. She stayed for 2 hours, spent most of it on her phone, and left before the reception ended. Then came the silence. 3 full years without a single word. No birthday calls, no Christmas cards, nothing. I sent her messages that went unanswered. I called numbers that went to voicemail. It was like she'd erased me from her existence and I had no idea why. I cried myself to sleep more nights than I can count, wondering what I'd done to deserve being cut out of my only child's life. Last Tuesday morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, Jessica's voice came through, bright and cheerful as if no time had passed at all. "Mom, hi, it's me. I know it's been a while, but I really think we should talk. There's so much I want to share with you." My hand trembled as I held the phone. Part of me wanted to hang up, to protect myself from whatever new hurt she was about to inflict. But she was still my daughter, and that stupid, stubborn part of my heart that refused to stop loving her made me say yes. We met at a coffee shop in the short north, neutral territory. I arrived 15 minutes early and watched through the window as she pulled up in a sleek black BMW. She stepped out wearing a cream-colored designer suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her hair professionally styled, her makeup flawless. She looked like a stranger, like someone who'd been carefully constructed to fit into a world that had no room for people like me. "Patricia," she said as she slid into the seat across from me. She didn't call me Mom. She ordered a complicated latte that required 3 modifications, then turned to me with a practiced smile. "You look well." I didn't return the compliment. I asked her directly why she'd called, why after 3 years of nothing she suddenly wanted to talk. The smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "I've been doing a lot of personal growth work," she said. "A lot of therapy. I've realized that I need to repair our relationship before I can move forward with the next chapter of my life." The words sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in front of a mirror. I waited for her to continue. "I'm getting married," she announced, pulling out her phone to show me photos of her ring. A massive diamond that caught the light and threw rainbows across the table. "His name is Brandon Whitmore. He's a venture capitalist. We met at a charity gala 2 years ago." I stared at the ring, at the happiness on her face in the photos she swiped through. 2 years. She'd been engaged or at least in a serious relationship for 2 years and never told me. "When's the wedding?" I asked, my voice flat. She hesitated. "Next month. The Breakers in Palm Beach. It's going to be intimate, just close family and friends." The word intimate hit me like a slap. I wasn't invited, I said. It wasn't a question. Jessica looked down at her coffee. The planning has been so complicated, she started. Brandon's family has very specific expectations. His mother is very involved, and there were complications with the guest list with the venue capacity. She trailed off, waiting for me to fill the silence with understanding, with forgiveness. I didn't give it to her. So why are you telling me now, I asked. Why call me after 3 years just to inform me about a wedding I'm not invited to? That's when her expression changed. The carefully maintained mask of reconciliation cracked just slightly, and I saw something calculating underneath. Actually, she said slowly, I was hoping we could discuss a financial matter. There it was. The real reason for this reunion. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What kind of financial matter? Jessica leaned forward, her voice taking on a tone of forced intimacy. Mom, I've always been responsible with money. I've built a successful career, I've made smart investments. But this wedding has gotten out of control. Brandon's mother insisted on certain vendors, certain details, and the costs have escalated beyond what we initially budgeted. How much, I asked. She took a breath. The total is about $80,000. We've covered most of it, but there's a shortfall of about $30,000 that we need by the end of the month or we'll lose our deposits. She reached across the table to touch my hand. I know it's a lot to ask, but I thought since you've always wanted to be part of my life, since you've always said you'd do anything for me, maybe this could be a way for us to reconnect. Through me giving her money for a wedding I wasn't invited to. The audacity was breathtaking. I pulled my hand back. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You cut me out of your life for 3 years. You're getting married and didn't invite me. And now you want me to give you $30,000 to help pay for this wedding I'm not attending. Jessica's expression hardened. I knew you'd make this difficult. You always have to be the victim, don't you? Always have to make everything about your hurt feelings instead of thinking about what I need. The accusation was so absurd I almost laughed. What you need, I repeated. Jessica, I spent your entire childhood giving you what you needed. I worked myself to exhaustion so you could have opportunities one never had. And the moment you didn't need me anymore, you threw me away. That's not fair, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. She knew it was true. I don't have $30,000 to give you, I told her. And even if I did, I wouldn't hand it over so you could throw a party that I'm apparently too embarrassing to attend. Jessica's face flushed with anger. Fine, she snapped. I should have known you'd be selfish about this. You've never understood the kind of life I'm trying to build, the kind of image I need to maintain. You're always going to be stuck in your working class mindset, dragging me down with your limitations. She stood up, grabbing her designer purse. Don't bother calling me again. Clearly, we have nothing more to say to each other. I watched her walk out, her heels clicking against the floor with sharp, angry strikes. I sat there for a long time after she left, staring at my cold coffee and trying to process what had just happened. My daughter had looked me in the eye and called me selfish for refusing to bankroll a wedding I wasn't invited to. The cruelty of it was stunning. But as I replayed the conversation in my mind, something started bothering me. Jessica had mentioned a shortfall of $30,000, but then said the total wedding cost was $80,000. If they'd covered most of it, the math didn't add up. And her nervousness when she quoted the numbers, the way she'd stumbled over the explanation. She was lying about something. I went home and did what any paralegal with 3 decades of experience would do. I started digging. I knew Jessica's social media accounts were private, locked away from my prying eyes, but I had other resources. I called my sister's daughter Rachel, who was still connected to Jessica online. Rachel was hesitant at first, but when I explained what had happened, she agreed to help. What she found made my blood run cold. Jessica had been posting about her wedding for months, sharing every extravagant detail with her followers. The venue alone was costing $40,000. The flowers were $15,000. The photographer was $10,000. The dress was $12,000 from Vera Wong. When Rachel tallied up everything Jessica had publicly shared about her wedding expenses, the total came to over $150,000. Not $80,000. And there was more. Rachel found posts from 6 months ago, where Jessica had thrown an engagement party that cost $20,000. Posts about her bachelorette weekend in Napa Valley that ran another $15,000. Brandon's family was wealthy, But according to Jessica's own posts, they'd made it clear they weren't paying for the wedding. That was the bride's responsibility according to some outdated tradition Brandon's mother insisted on. So where was all this money coming from? I called my bank and asked them to run a check on any unusual activity or inquiries on my accounts. What they told me made me feel sick. Someone had attempted to open a credit card in my name 3 months ago. The application had been denied because I had a credit freeze in place, but the attempt was there. The application listed my personal information, my social security number, my date of birth. Everything perfectly accurate. Everything Jessica would have access to from old tax documents, old paperwork from when she was still living at home. I contacted the credit card company and got copies of the application. The phone number listed wasn't mine. It was a New York number I didn't recognize.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I called it and got a voicemail for someone named Patricia Whitmore. My first name, Brandon's last name. Jessica had tried to open a credit card in my name, planning to use it for wedding expenses, and when that failed, she'd come to me directly asking for cash. But I still didn't understand the full scope of what she was doing. That understanding came 2 days later when I received a call from a debt collection agency. They were looking for Patricia Cole regarding an outstanding balance of $67,000 with a luxury event planning company in Palm Beach. The account had been opened 8 months ago with a personal guarantee, and payments had stopped 3 months ago. The company was now pursuing legal action. I told them I wasn't Jessica and couldn't help them, but the call left me reeling. $67,000 in debt to a wedding planner. If the total wedding costs were over $150,000, and she owed $67,000 to just one vendor, how much total debt had she racked up? I spent the next week quietly investigating, using every research skill I developed in my legal career. I found liens against Jessica's apartment in Manhattan, collection notices from florists and caterers, angry emails from vendors demanding payment that Rachel found in Jessica's cloud storage that she'd carelessly left accessible. The picture that emerged was devastating. Jessica had been living far beyond her means for years, maintaining an Instagram-perfect lifestyle through credit cards and loans she couldn't repay. The wedding was supposed to be her crowning achievement, the ultimate proof that she'd made it into the elite circles she'd always aspired to join. But she'd financed it entirely through debt, and now the house of cards was collapsing. Brandon apparently knew nothing about her financial situation. In text messages Rachel found, Jessica had been lying to him about money, telling him she had a trust fund that was covering the wedding expenses, that her family was wealthy but private. She'd built her entire relationship on a foundation of deception, and the wedding was the final piece of the fantasy. Except she'd run out of credit, run out of options, and in desperation, she'd turned to the mother she'd spent 3 years pretending didn't exist. The mother she'd literally tried to commit identity theft against when the direct approach of asking for money seemed too risky. I should have been furious. I was furious, but I was also something else. I was calculating, because as I looked at all the evidence of Jessica's lies and schemes, I realized I had an opportunity to teach my daughter a lesson she desperately needed to learn, and maybe, just maybe, to save her from herself. I called Jessica. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice cold. "What do you want, Patricia?" "I've reconsidered your request," I said calmly. "I'd like to discuss the possibility of helping you with your wedding expenses." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. Then her voice came back, cautious but interested. "I'm listening." "I'd like to meet with you and Brandon," I said. "If I'm going to invest this kind of money in your wedding, I think I should at least meet the man you're marrying. And we should discuss the terms of this arrangement in detail." Jessica hesitated. "Brandon's very busy. I'm sure he can spare an hour," I said. "This is important, Jessica. If you want my help, this is non-negotiable." She agreed, though I could hear the suspicion in her voice. We set a meeting for that Saturday at a restaurant in Manhattan. I booked a flight and a hotel room, spending money I really couldn't afford to spend, but this was too important. This was about more than money now. This was about the truth. The restaurant Jessica chose was exactly what I expected. Expensive, exclusive, the kind of place where entrees cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. I arrived deliberately underdressed in a simple blouse and slacks, my hair unstyled, my face free of makeup except for a touch of lipstick. I wanted to be exactly what Jessica was ashamed of, a working-class mother who didn't belong in her gleaming new world. She was already seated when I arrived, and the man beside her had to be Brandon, tall, conventionally handsome, wearing a suit that screamed wealth. He stood when I approached, extending his hand with a practiced smile. "Mrs. Cole, it's wonderful to finally meet you. Jessica has told me so much about you." "Has she?" I said, shaking his hand and sliding into the seat across from them. "What exactly has she told you?" Brandon glanced at Jessica, clearly confused by my tone. "Well, that you live in Ohio. That you worked very hard to give her a good life. That you've always been supportive of her dreams. All technically true, I supposed, even if the framing was selective." I smiled tightly. I'm glad she mentioned me at all. There was a long silence. Jessica filled it by ordering wine, something obscure and expensive. When the waiter left, Brandon leaned forward with what seemed like genuine warmth. "Jessica mentioned that you were considering helping with some of the wedding expenses. I want you to know how much that means to both of us. This wedding has become more elaborate than we initially planned, but it's important to my mother that certain traditions are honored." "What traditions would those be?" I asked. Brandon looked uncomfortable. "My family has certain expectations about how weddings should be conducted. The venue, the guest list, the overall presentation. It's somewhat old-fashioned, I know, but it matters to them." "And who's paying for all these traditions?" I asked directly. Brandon's discomfort increased. "Well, traditionally, the bride's family covers the wedding expenses. It's an outdated custom, I realize, but my mother is quite insistent. She believes it's a matter of respect and proper form. So Jessica's family, meaning me, is expected to pay for a wedding that costs over $150,000 to satisfy your mother's sense of proper form." Brandon blinked. "I'm sorry, did you say $150,000? The budget Jessica shared with me was $80,000. The look on Jessica's face was pure panic. She tried to interrupt, but I kept going. "Has Jessica shown you the actual invoices, Brandon? The contracts with the vendors, the payment schedules? Do you know how much debt she's already accumulated trying to pay for this wedding?" "What debt?" Brandon asked, turning to Jessica. His expression had shifted from friendly to concerned. "Jessica, you told me you had everything covered. You said your trust fund was handling all the expenses." "I don't have a trust fund," I said quietly. "I'm a paralegal in Columbus, Ohio. I raised Jessica alone on a modest income. There is no family wealth, no hidden money. Whatever Jessica has told you about her financial background is a lie." The color drained from Brandon's face. Jessica was frantically trying to salvage the situation, talking over me about misunderstandings and exaggerations, but Brandon wasn't listening to her. He was staring at me with an expression of dawning horror. "How much debt?" he asked again, his voice tight. I pulled out the folder I'd brought with me. Inside were printouts of everything I'd found. The collection notices, the liens, the credit card statements Rachel had accessed, the attempted fraud using my identity. I spread them across the table like evidence in a trial. "Approximately $130,000, I said. Most of it related to this wedding, but some of it from maintaining a lifestyle she couldn't afford. She tried to open credit cards in my name to cover more expenses. When that failed, she called me for the first time in 3 years to ask for $30,000 in cash." Brandon picked up one of the documents, his hands shaking slightly. "This is a lien against your apartment," he said to Jessica. "You told me you owned it outright." Jessica's face had gone pale. She looked between us, trapped and desperate. "Brandon, please let me explain. This isn't what it looks like." "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, not unkindly. "My daughter has been living a lie, and she's dragged you into it. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Brandon stood up abruptly. "I need some air." He walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Jessica turned to me with fury blazing in her eyes. "You just ruined my life. You destroyed everything I've built. You built it on lies, Jessica," I said. "And it was already collapsing. I didn't ruin your life. I just exposed the truth before you dragged Brandon into financial and legal disaster with you." She grabbed her purse and stood up. "I will never forgive you for this. Never." She stormed out, leaving me alone at the table with the evidence of her deception spread out in front of me. I paid for the wine Jessica had ordered and left. I expected that to be the end of it, expected never to hear from her again. But 2 days later my phone rang. It was Brandon. "Mrs. Cole, I was hoping we could talk. Just the two of us." We met at a quiet coffee shop far from the restaurant where everything had exploded. Brandon looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept since our confrontation. "Thank you for meeting with me," he said. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why wouldn't I asked. He laughed bitterly. "After what happened, I thought you might want nothing to do with any of us." "I'm not angry at you, Brandon. You're a victim in this too." He was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "I've spent the last 2 days going through everything. The finances, the lies, all of it. I had no idea. Jessica told me she came from a wealthy family that valued privacy. She showed me photos of a house she claimed was her childhood home. It was actually my neighbor's house," I said. "I recognized it from the Instagram posts Rachel showed me. She used to babysit there in high school." Brandon closed his eyes. The engagement party, the bachelorette trip, even her apartment. All of it financed through debt that I knew nothing about. She told me she was financially independent, that she didn't need my help or my money. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe I'd found someone who loved me for myself, not for my family's wealth. I felt a wave of sympathy for him. He seemed genuine, hurt, and trying to make sense of how he'd been so thoroughly deceived. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "The wedding is off, obviously. I canceled everything yesterday. The venue, the vendors, all of it. It's going to cost me a fortune in cancellation fees, but less than going through with a marriage based on lies." He looked at me directly. "I want you to know that I offered to help Jessica deal with the debt. Not pay it all, but help her set up a payment plan, work with the creditors. She refused. Said she'd rather handle it herself than accept charity from me." "That sounds like Jessica," I said. "Too proud to accept help, but willing to steal and deceive to maintain her image." Brandon pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table to me. "I found this in her apartment when I was helping her pack up some things. I think you should have it." Inside the envelope was a letter. My letter. One I'd written to Jessica 3 years ago, right after she'd stopped taking my calls. In it I'd poured out my heart, telling her how much I loved her, how proud I was of her accomplishments, how I didn't understand why she'd pushed me away, but that I would always be there when she was ready to talk. At the bottom of the letter, in Jessica's handwriting, were notes. Calculations about how much she thought I might be worth, estimates of what she could potentially inherit, a cold-blooded assessment of my financial value to her. She'd been planning this for years, planning to use me as a last resort bank when she inevitably overextended herself. "I'm sorry," Brandon said quietly. "I thought you should know the truth about how she viewed you. It hurts, I admit it. But it also confirms what I already suspected. Jessica sees people as resources, not relationships. She learned that from somewhere," Brandon said. "People aren't born that way." I thought about that. About Jessica's father leaving, about the years of struggle, about how she'd watched me work myself to exhaustion and maybe learned the wrong lessons from it. Maybe she decided that money was the only thing that mattered, that image and status were worth any price, that love was a weakness to be exploited. Or maybe that was just who she'd always been, and I'd been too blinded by maternal devotion to see it. "I don't know," I told Brandon honestly. "But it's not my responsibility to fix her anymore. She's an adult. She made her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences." We talked for another hour. Brandon was a decent person, I realized. Someone who genuinely cared for Jessica and was now processing the betrayal. Before we parted, he asked me one more question. "Do you think she'll ever change?" I considered that carefully. "I hope so," I said finally. "But change requires honesty and humility, and Jessica has shown no capacity for either. Until she hits rock bottom and realizes that her way of living doesn't work, she'll keep running the same patterns with different people. I hope for your sake you don't wait around to find out if that day ever comes." He nodded. "I'm moving to San Francisco next month. New job, fresh start. I think I need to put as much distance as possible between myself and this situation." "That sounds wise," I said. And I meant it. 3 weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a woman's voice identified herself as Detective Sarah Mitchell with the NYPD Fraud Division. She asked if I was aware that my daughter had been arrested for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny. My heart sank even though I'd known this was coming. After Brandon ended things, Jessica had apparently spiraled. She'd attempted to use forged documents to access his bank accounts. She'd stolen credit cards from her roommate. She'd run up charges at high-end stores and fled when confronted by security. The house of cards had collapsed completely, and she'd made it worse with each desperate attempt to salvage her lifestyle. The detective asked if I wanted to press charges for the identity theft attempt. I should have said yes. I should have let Jessica face full consequences for trying to commit fraud using my information. But she was still my daughter and I couldn't do it. I declined to press charges for that specific crime, though the other charges were moving forward with or without my cooperation. Jessica was released on bail after 3 days. I know because she called me from a payphone, crying so hard I could barely understand her words. "Mom, please, I need help. I've lost everything. My job fired me when they found out about the arrest. I'm going to lose my apartment. I have nowhere to go." The instinct to rescue her was so strong it physically hurt to resist. But I knew that saving her now would only teach her that she could keep behaving this way, and Mom would always catch her fall. "I can't help you, Jessica," I said, my voice breaking. "You need to face what you've done and figure out how to fix it yourself." She screamed at me then, called me every cruel name she could think of, told me I was a terrible mother, that I'd failed her, that this was all my fault for not giving her the life she deserved. I listened until she ran out of words. Then I said quietly, "I love you, Jessica. I always have. But loving you doesn't mean enabling you to destroy yourself. When you're ready to take responsibility for your choices and genuinely try to change, I'll be here. Until then, I can't watch you burn down your life and expect me to keep handing you matches." I hung up and blocked her number. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. The trial was brief. Jessica pleaded guilty to multiple counts in exchange for a reduced sentence. 18 months in a minimum security facility, 5 years probation, and mandatory restitution to her victims. I didn't attend the sentencing. I couldn't bear to see her in that courtroom, to watch my daughter be led away in handcuffs. My sister went instead and called me afterward to tell me what happened. Jessica had given a statement before sentencing, my sister said. She talked about her childhood, about feeling abandoned by her father, about the pressure she felt to succeed. But she never took real responsibility. Everything was someone else's fault. The judge didn't buy it. Told her she was an adult who made deliberate choices to defraud and deceive people who cared about her. That was 4 months ago. Jessica is serving her sentence now at a facility in upstate New York. I haven't visited or written or reached out in any way. Some people tell me I'm being too harsh, that I should support her through this difficult time. But those people don't understand that my support is what enabled her to become who she is. Every time I rescued her from the consequences of her actions, I taught her that actions don't have consequences. Not anymore. Yesterday I received a letter. Not from Jessica, but from a counselor at her facility. She wrote that Jessica has been participating in therapy and a financial literacy program. That she's been working in the prison library and taking courses on business ethics. The counselor said Jessica had written me multiple letters but torn them all up, saying she didn't know how to apologize for what she'd done. The counselor asked if I'd be willing to participate in a family therapy session when Jessica was further along in her recovery. I haven't decided yet if I'll go. Part of me wants to believe that Jessica is genuinely changing, that she's finally facing the truth about herself and trying to become better. Part of me is terrified that this is just another manipulation, another performance designed to get what she wants. What I do know is that I'm done sacrificing myself for someone who sees me as nothing but a resource to exploit. I'm done setting myself on fire to keep Jessica warm. If she genuinely wants a relationship with me, she'll have to earn it through sustained change, through real accountability, through treating me like a human being instead of an ATM machine with a heartbeat. I've started therapy myself, working through decades of codependency and misplaced guilt. I've joined a support group for parents of adult children who've chosen destructive paths. I've started saving money for myself, for the retirement I'd always put off because Jessica might need something. For the first time in my adult life, I'm learning to prioritize my own well-being without feeling guilty about it. I still love my daughter. I probably always will. But I'm learning that love doesn't mean accepting mistreatment, And being a good mother doesn't mean being a doormat. Maybe someday Jessica will understand the difference between support and enablement, between love and exploitation. Maybe someday we'll have an honest relationship built on mutual respect, instead of manipulation and guilt. Until that day comes, if it ever does, I'm choosing myself. And that doesn't make me selfish. It makes me finally wise. 6 months passed in what felt like both an eternity and a blink. I settled into my new life with an odd mixture of peace and lingering sadness that I couldn't quite shake. My therapist, Dr. Sharon Wendt, told me this was normal. You don't simply stop loving someone because they hurt you, she said during one of our sessions. You're grieving the daughter you thought you had while learning to accept the daughter who actually exists. Those are two very different people, and reconciling that takes time. I threw myself into work with renewed focus. The law firm where I'd been a paralegal for 23 years noticed the change. I started taking on more complex cases, volunteering for projects I'd previously avoided because I'd always been too exhausted from worrying about Jessica. My supervisor, Martin Chun, called me into his office one Thursday afternoon in late September. "Patricia, I've been impressed with your work lately," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "The Henderson case you handled last month was exceptional. Your research uncovered precedents that our associates missed entirely." I thanked him, unsure where this was going. Martin leaned back in his chair, studying me over his reading glasses. "We have an opening for a senior paralegal position. Comes with a significant raise and better benefits. I'd like you to consider applying." The offer stunned me. In all my years at the firm, I'd never pursued advancement because I'd always thought I needed to keep my schedule flexible for Jessica's needs, real or imagined. The salary increase would be substantial, enough to finally build the retirement savings I'd neglected for decades. I accepted on the spot. My coworkers took me out to celebrate that Friday, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel proud of an achievement that had nothing to do with being Jessica's mother. I was Patricia Cole, skilled professional, valued employee, capable woman. Not just a walking wallet whose only purpose was funding someone else's dreams. Rachel, my niece, called me the following week with news that made my carefully constructed piece wobble. "Aunt Patricia, I thought you should know. Jessica's been paroled early for good behavior. She's getting out next month." My heart lurched. "How do you know this?" Rachel hesitated. "She reached out to me on Facebook. Asked if I'd help her find a place to stay when she's released. She said she's been trying to get in touch with you, but you haven't responded to any of her letters." "I haven't received any letters," I said, which was true. The prison counselor had mentioned Jessica writing them, but I'd never actually received anything. Rachel was quiet for a moment. "She claims she's changed, Aunt Patricia. Says she's been doing therapy, taking classes, working on herself. She sounds different in her messages. More humble. What did you tell her about staying with you?" "That I needed to think about it. That I'd talk to you first." Rachel's voice softened. "I don't want to be disloyal to you, but she is my cousin. If she's genuinely trying to turn her life around, shouldn't someone give her a chance?" I understood Rachel's conflict. She was young, optimistic, still believed that people fundamentally changed when they hit rock bottom. I believed that once too. "I don't want to tell you what to do, Rachel," I said carefully, "but I will tell you to be very cautious. Jessica is exceptional at presenting whatever version of herself gets her what she needs in the moment. If you do decide to help her, protect yourself. Don't give her access to your finances, don't co-sign anything. Don't make yourself vulnerable to her manipulation." Rachel promised she'd be careful, but I could hear in her voice that she'd already half decided to help Jessica. Young people always think they'll be the exception, the one person who can save the lost soul. I knew because I'd spent 30 years thinking the same thing. 3 weeks later, my doorbell rang on a Sunday afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I looked through the peephole, my breath caught in my throat. Jessica stood on my porch, thinner than I remembered, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a plain sweater instead of designer clothes. She looked young and vulnerable and nothing like the polished woman who'd asked me for $30,000 in that coffee shop. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. We stood there looking at each other across the threshold. Years of hurt and anger and love swirling in the space between us. "Mom," she said quietly. Her voice cracked on the word. I didn't respond, just waited to see what she'd say next. "I know I have no right to be here," she continued. I know you told me not to contact you until I genuinely changed. I don't know if I have. I don't know if anyone can really change that fundamentally. But I've been trying. I'm trying every day. What do you want, Jessica? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Just to talk. 10 minutes of your time. That's all I'm asking. Against my better judgment, against every warning my therapist had given me about maintaining boundaries, I stepped aside and let her into my house. We sat in my living room, the same room where she played as a child, where we decorated Christmas trees and celebrated birthdays and had 1,000 ordinary moments before everything fell apart. The familiarity of it seemed to affect her. She looked around with an expression I couldn't quite read. I've been staying with Rachel, she said. She offered me her spare room for a few months while I get back on my feet. I'm working at a coffee shop saving money. I'm paying back my debts in installments. It'll take years, but I'm doing it. That's good, I said. I meant it. Accountability was the first step toward genuine change. Jessica twisted her hands in her lap. I went through your letters in therapy. The ones you sent me before I cut you off. My counselor had me read them out loud and really hear what you were saying. How much you loved me. How much you sacrificed. How you just wanted to be part of my life. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. I threw all of that away because I was ashamed of where I came from. Ashamed of you. The words hurt even though I'd known the truth for years. Why? I asked. Why was I so shameful to you? Jessica wiped her eyes. Because you reminded me of everything I was afraid of becoming. Working class, struggling, never quite having enough. I looked at your life and saw limitation instead of seeing the strength it took to build what you built with nothing. I wanted to be someone else so badly that I convinced myself I already was that person. And anyone who contradicted that fantasy had to be erased. It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. I felt something in my chest loosen slightly, just a fraction. What changed? I asked. Getting arrested? Losing Brandon? Going to prison? All of it, she said. But mostly it was sitting in a cell with nothing to do but think about how I'd gotten there. How every single choice I made was about maintaining an image instead of building something real. How I'd destroyed every genuine relationship I had in pursuit of a fantasy that was never sustainable. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to trust me or want me in your life. But I needed you to know that I understand now what I did to you. How I used you and manipulated you and treated you like you were worthless when you were the only person who ever really loved me. I sat with her words for a long moment. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to think that this time was different, that she'd truly hit bottom and was climbing back up. But I'd been burned too many times. I appreciate you saying that, Jessica, I said finally. And I can see that you're making some positive changes. But I need you to understand that I can't just welcome you back into my life like nothing happened. I need to protect myself. I need to see sustained change over time. Not just words and good intentions. Jessica nodded, more tears spilling down her cheeks. I understand. I'm not asking for anything from you. I just wanted you to hear me say that I'm sorry. That I was wrong. That you deserved so much better than what I gave you. We talked for another hour. She told me about prison. About the therapy sessions where she'd had to confront the pattern of lying and manipulation that had defined her adult life. She talked about the financial literacy classes that had shown her how deep in denial she'd been about money. How she'd confused spending with success and debt with wealth. She described working in the prison library, helping other inmates prepare for their GED exams, and finding unexpected satisfaction in being useful to people who couldn't give her anything in return. It all sounded good. Too good, maybe. I'd learned to be suspicious of redemption narratives that came too easily. Before she left, Jessica handed me a small notebook. What's this? I asked. A record of every debt I owe and every payment I've made, she said. I wanted you to see that I'm actually doing what I said I would do. Not just talking about change but living it. I took the notebook but didn't open it while she was there. After she left, I sat alone in my living room and flipped through the pages. She'd meticulously documented every creditor, every amount owed, every payment made from her coffee shop wages. The numbers were sobering. At her current rate of repayment, it would take her nearly 8 years to clear all her debts. 8 years of living simply, working hard, making amends. It was either genuine commitment or an elaborate long con. Time would tell which. Over the following months, Jessica maintained contact but respected my boundaries. She didn't ask for money or favors. She sent brief text messages updating me on her progress, sharing small victories like getting promoted to shift supervisor at the coffee shop or making an extra payment on her debts. She invited me to coffee a few times, and after the third invitation I accepted. We met at a chain cafe near my office, nothing fancy, and talked about surface things. Her job, my promotion, the weather. It felt awkward and tentative, like two strangers trying to find common ground. But it also felt different from before. There was no agenda lurking beneath her words, no sense that she was performing for my benefit. Rachel reported that Jessica was being a model house guest, cleaning without being asked, contributing to groceries, respecting Rachel's space and schedule. She's really trying, Aunt Patricia, Rachel told me. I know you're skeptical and I get why. But I think she's for real this time. I wanted to believe it. I really did. But decades of disappointment had taught me to protect my hope as carefully as my money. Then, 4 months after Jessica's release, something happened that tested everything. I got a call from Brandon. I hadn't heard from him since that coffee shop conversation in New York, and hearing his voice brought back the whole painful mess. Mrs. Cole, I hope I'm not overstepping by calling, he said. But I wanted to let you know that Jessica reached out to me. My stomach dropped. What did she want? That's the thing, Brandon said, sounding genuinely confused. She didn't want anything. She called to apologize. Said she'd been making amends to people she'd hurt and wanted me to know she was sorry for lying to me. For the financial mess, for everything. She wasn't asking for forgiveness or trying to get back together. She just wanted me to know she understood the harm she'd caused. How did you respond? I was skeptical at first, Brandon admitted. I thought it might be some kind of scam. But we ended up talking for over an hour. She sounded different, Mrs. Cole. More grounded. She told me about the work she's been doing on herself, the therapy, the debt repayment. She took full responsibility without making excuses or playing the victim. It was the first honest conversation we'd ever had. Do you believe her? I asked. I don't know, Brandon said. But I found myself wanting to. She's either genuinely changed or she's become an even better actress. He paused. I thought you should know because if she's reaching out to me to make amends, she's probably serious about whatever transformation she's claiming. After we hung up, I sat with the information for a long time. Jessica making amends to Brandon when there was nothing to gain from it, when he'd already written her off and moved on. That suggested something different from her usual manipulation. That suggested actual accountability. I decided to test her. I called and asked if she'd meet me for dinner, my treat, at a restaurant of her choosing. The old Jessica would have picked somewhere expensive, somewhere that would let her feel important again. The new Jessica, if she existed, would pick something reasonable. She chose a mid-range Italian place near Rachel's apartment. Decent food, reasonable prices, nothing flashy. When I arrived, she was already there, wearing the same jeans and sweater from her first visit. No designer clothes, no expensive accessories, no mask of sophistication. Just Jessica, looking tired but somehow more real than she'd ever looked before. Thank you for inviting me, she said as I sat down. I know you didn't have to. I wanted to talk to you about something, I said. I spoke with Brandon recently. Jessica's face went pale. Oh, you called him to make amends, I said. Why? She looked down at her menu, then back up at me. My therapist suggested it as part of my recovery work. Making amends to people I'd harmed. I was terrified to call him, honestly. Thought he'd hang up on me or tell me to go to hell. Would have deserved it if he had. But you called anyway. I had to, she said. I spent so long running from consequences, from accountability. If I'm going to actually change and not just perform change, I have to face the people I hurt and own what I did. Even when it's scary. Especially when it's scary. We ordered food and I watched her carefully throughout the meal. She didn't order the most expensive items. She didn't drink alcohol. She didn't spend the dinner talking about herself or her plans or her needs. Instead, she asked about me. About my promotion, about my therapy, about whether I'd been doing anything for myself lately. It felt bizarre, having my daughter show genuine interest in my life. Mom, she said as we finished eating, there's something I need to tell you. Here it comes, I thought. The real reason for this dinner, the ask, the manipulation. But what she said surprised me. I've been going to Debtors Anonymous meetings. It's like AA but for people with compulsive spending and debt problems. I've been sharing my story there. And it's helped me understand that my issues with money were never really about money. They were about feeling worthless unless I looked successful. About equating my value as a person with external markers of status. She folded her napkin carefully. One of the steps is making financial amends. I've been paying back my creditors, but I also owe you an amends. Jessica, you don't owe me money, I started to say. But she held up her hand. Not money. Time. I stole years of your life by making everything about me, by treating you like an ATM instead of a human being. I can't give you those years back, but I can commit to showing up differently going forward. If you'll let me. What does that look like? I asked. She pulled out a piece of paper from her bag. It was a handwritten list. No asking you for money ever, under any circumstances. No manipulating or guilt-tripping you into doing things for me. Respecting your boundaries even when I don't like them. Being honest about my struggles instead of pretending everything is fine. Contributing to our relationship instead of just taking from it. Celebrating your accomplishments instead of making them about me. Being someone you can count on instead of someone you have to protect yourself from. I stared at the list, my vision blurring with tears I hadn't expected. This was what I wanted for so long. Not money, not status, not a perfect daughter. Just someone who saw me as a person worthy of respect and care. I don't know if I can trust this yet, I said honestly. I want to, but I've been hurt too many times. I know, Jessica said. And I don't blame you for being cautious. All I can do is show up consistently and prove through my actions that I mean what I say. However long that takes. We left the restaurant and stood in the parking lot under the streetlights. Jessica hugged me, and for the first time in years, I hugged her back without reservation. She felt smaller than I remembered, more fragile. Or maybe I just felt stronger. The months that followed brought steady, incremental change. Jessica kept every commitment she made on her list. She didn't ask for money when her car broke down and she had to take the bus to work. She respected my boundaries when I told her I wasn't ready to spend holidays together yet. She was honest when she struggled with the temptation to fall back into old spending patterns. She showed up to help me move into a new apartment without being asked. She remembered my birthday and sent a card with a heartfelt message instead of an expensive gift she couldn't afford. Small things, but they accumulated into something that started to feel like trust. One evening in December, almost a year after her release from prison, Jessica called me in tears. Mom, I need to talk to someone and I don't know who else to call. My first instinct was panic. What happened? Are you okay? She was crying too hard to speak clearly at first. When she finally calmed down enough to explain, the story tumbled out. One of her coworkers at the coffee shop had offered her a business opportunity. A chance to invest in what was supposedly a guaranteed money-making venture. The old Jessica would have jumped at it without thinking. The new Jessica had recognized it as a scam but was still tempted because the promise of quick money was so seductive. I didn't do it, she said through her tears. I told them no. But Mom, I wanted to say yes so badly. I wanted to believe that there was an easy way out of this hole I've dug myself into. It scared me how much I wanted to believe the lie. I'm so proud of you, I said, and meant it. Recognizing the temptation and choosing differently, that's real growth, Jessica. That's exactly the kind of choice that shows me you're committed to changing. We talked for an hour that night. I shared some of my own struggles with wanting easy solutions to hard problems. We cried together and laughed together, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were actually mother and daughter instead of adversaries. By the time spring arrived, I made a decision. I invited Jessica to join me for Easter dinner. Not at a restaurant but at my apartment. Just the two of us, home-cooked meal, nothing fancy. She arrived with a small bouquet of daffodils from the grocery store, and a homemade dessert she'd baked herself. We ate ham and scalloped potatoes and talked about everything and nothing. It felt normal. It felt like the relationship I'd always wanted but thought I'd never have. After dinner, as we washed dishes together, Jessica said something that made me stop mid-scrub. Mom, I want you to know that I've started seeing a financial counselor. Someone who's helping me create a real budget and savings plan. And I've been putting away a little money each month in an account I can't easily access. It's not much, just $20 or $30 when I can spare it, but it's mine. Clean money that I earned honestly and saved intentionally. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I want you to know that I'm building something real now, she said. Something that's not based on lies or debt or pretending to be someone I'm not. I don't know if I'll ever be wealthy or successful by the standards I used to care about. But I'm learning to be proud of honest work and slow progress. That's a lot more than I had before. We finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and as Jessica prepared to leave, she handed me an envelope. What's this? Open it after I'm gone, she said. After she left, I sat on my couch and opened the envelope. Inside was a check for $500 and a letter. The check was made out to me, and the letter explained that it was the first installment of repayment for all the money she'd cost me over the years. Not just the money she'd asked for directly, but the emotional cost, the stress, the years of my life I'd spent worrying about her instead of taking care of myself. The letter continued. I know $500 doesn't come close to covering what I took from you. I know it will take years to repay you in full. But I wanted you to see that I'm serious about making amends, not just with words but with actions. This money represents months of saving, of choosing not to buy things I wanted so I could give back to you what I'd taken. I don't expect you to cash the check. If you want to tear it up, I'll understand. But I needed to offer it as proof that I'm different now. That I value you as more than just a source of money. That I'm finally becoming someone worthy of having you as a mother. I held that check and letter for a long time, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness but something more complex. Relief maybe. Or hope. Or the beginning of forgiveness. I didn't cash the check immediately. Instead, I put it in a drawer and waited. I wanted to see if Jessica would ask about it, would pressure me about it, would use it as leverage for something else. She never mentioned it. Not once. 3 months later, after watching her continue to show up consistently, to maintain her boundaries list, to work her program and pay her debts and live honestly, I finally cashed the check. I put the money in a savings account and decided that if Jessica truly stayed on this path, I'd give it back to her someday as a down payment on her future. A reward for the hard work of becoming someone new. A year and a half after Jessica's release from prison, Rachel called with news. Aunt Patricia, Jessica got accepted to community college. She's going to study accounting. She says she wants to help people avoid the financial mistakes she made. I felt a surge of pride so strong it almost knocked me over. That's wonderful, I said. Really is. She's scared, Rachel continued. Worried about balancing work and school. Worried about taking on even minimal student loan debt after everything she went through. But she's doing it anyway. She's choosing to invest in herself in a healthy way. That evening, I called Jessica to congratulate her. Thank you, Mom, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I'm terrified, honestly. But I keep reminding myself that hard work toward something real is better than easy lies that fall apart. I'm proud of you, I told her. And I meant it with my whole heart. There was a long pause. Then Jessica said quietly, I've been wanting to ask you something but I've been afraid. Ask, I said. Would you consider being my reference for a scholarship I'm applying for? They want someone who can speak to my character and my commitment to change. I understand if you're not comfortable with that, but you're the person who knows me best. Both who I was and who I'm trying to become. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. I'd be honored to be your reference, Jessica. And I was. Because the woman applying for that scholarship wasn't the same person who'd asked me for $30,000 for a wedding I wasn't invited to. She was someone who'd been broken down completely, and was rebuilding herself piece by painful piece into someone authentic. I wrote that reference letter with complete honesty. I detailed Jessica's past mistakes without sugar-coating them. I explained the depth of her fall, and the dedication of her recovery. I described the transformation I'd witnessed not as a sudden change but as a daily choice she made over and over to be different, to be better, to be real. Jessica got the scholarship. It wasn't a full ride, just enough to cover her tuition for 2 semesters, but she cried when she got the news. She called me immediately. Mom, I got it. I actually got it. Someone believed in me enough to invest in my education. I'm getting a real second chance. We're all getting a second chance, I told her. You're getting a chance to rebuild your life. I'm getting a chance to have a real relationship with my daughter instead of a fantasy or a nightmare. That's worth more than any amount of money. As we talked, I realized something profound had shifted. For the first time since Jessica was a small child, I wasn't afraid of her. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the manipulation to reveal itself, for the mask to slip. I was simply enjoying a conversation with someone I loved who was finally becoming someone I could also like and respect. The healing wasn't complete. There were still moments of pain, still scars that ached, still trust that needed more time to fully rebuild. But we were moving in the right direction, both of us growing into better versions of ourselves. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. 2 years after Jessica started community college, she graduated with honors and a job offer from a nonprofit financial counseling organization. She called me from the graduation ceremony, her voice bright with genuine joy. "Mom, they're offering me $42,000 a year to help people get out of debt. Can you believe it? After everything I did, someone is trusting me to help others avoid the mistakes I made." I could believe it because I'd watched her earn that trust through hundreds of small, consistent choices. She'd maintained her sobriety from compulsive spending. She'd continued therapy even when it was uncomfortable. She'd volunteered at a women's shelter teaching basic financial literacy. She'd become someone who used her painful past as a foundation for helping others, rather than a story to generate sympathy. The transformation was real, and it was breathtaking to witness. That fall, Jessica invited me to an event at her new workplace. They were hosting a seminar on recovering from financial crisis, and she'd been asked to share her story as part of a panel. I almost didn't go. Despite all the progress we'd made, part of me was still protective of my heart, still wary of being disappointed. But Rachel convinced me. "She's worked so hard for this moment, Aunt Patricia. She wants you there." I drove to the community center where the event was being held, my stomach tight with nervousness. The room was packed with people of all ages, all facing some kind of financial struggle. Jessica stood at the front with 3 other panelists, looking professional in a simple navy dress and minimal jewelry. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't hide anything. She told the audience about her descent into debt, about the lies she'd told, about using her own mother as a potential victim of identity theft. She talked about hitting rock bottom in a prison cell and realizing that her entire life had been built on sand. Some people in the audience looked shocked. Others nodded with recognition, seeing their own struggles reflected in her story. But what really struck me was how she framed her recovery. "I didn't change because I wanted to," she told them. "I changed because I had to. Because the alternative was losing everything that actually mattered. My mother, my self-respect, my chance at a real future." She looked directly at me then, and I felt tears spring to my eyes. I had to learn that love isn't something you take from people until they have nothing left to give. Love is something you build together through honesty and respect, and showing up even when it's hard. My mother taught me that by refusing to enable my self-destruction, even though it broke her heart to set those boundaries. After the panel, several people approached Jessica to thank her for her honesty, to ask for advice, to share their own stories. I watched her engage with each person with genuine compassion and practical wisdom. This was who she'd become. Not the desperate woman who'd called me begging for money to fund a fantasy wedding. Not the frightened ex-convict trying to rebuild from nothing. She was someone whole and purposeful, someone who transmuted her shame into service. When the crowd finally thinned, Jessica found me standing near the back of the room. "What did you think?" she asked, and I could hear the vulnerability beneath the question. "I think you're extraordinary," I said. "And I think that woman who stood up there and told the truth about her failures and her recovery is someone I'm incredibly proud to call my daughter." Jessica hugged me tightly and whispered, "I couldn't have become her without you refusing to save me from myself. Thank you for loving me enough to let me fall." We went to dinner afterward, just the 2 of us, at a small Thai restaurant near her apartment. Over pad thai and spring rolls, she told me about her plans. The nonprofit wanted to expand their services to include workshops in prisons, and Jessica had volunteered to develop the curriculum. "I want to reach people before they get out," she explained. "Give them tools to avoid the traps I fell into when I was released." She talked about maybe going back to school eventually for a master's degree in social work or counseling. About dreams of writing a book someday about financial recovery. About possibly starting a podcast to reach more people who were struggling. These were real dreams, grounded in genuine passion rather than ego or the need to impress others. I found myself offering to help however I could, not because she asked but because I wanted to support someone who was actually doing meaningful work. As we left the restaurant, Jessica said something that caught me off guard. "Mom, I've been thinking about the money. What money? I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. The $500 I gave you 2 years ago. And all the other money I owe you from over the years. I've been keeping track, and I've calculated that I probably cost you close to $15,000 when you factor in the identity theft attempt, the emotional costs, everything. She stopped walking and turned to face me. I want to set up a payment plan to pay you back in full. Jessica, that's not necessary, I started to say. Yes, it is, she interrupted. Not because you're asking for it, but because I need to make full amends. It's going to take me years at my current salary, but I want to do it. I want you to know that I take responsibility for every dollar, every moment, every tear I cost you. I looked at my daughter, this woman who'd been so broken and was now so determined to make things right. Pay, I said. But on one condition. Jessica looked wary. What condition? Whatever you pay me back. I'm putting into a college fund for your future children. Or your future graduate school. Or whatever you need it for when the time comes. I don't want your money as restitution, Jessica. I want to invest it in the future you're building. She started crying right there on the sidewalk, and I held her while she sobbed. Thank you, she kept saying. Thank you for believing I have a future worth investing in. The years continued to unfold with surprising gentleness. Jessica paid me exactly $100 every month without fail, never late. Always with a note detailing her current financial situation and her progress toward her other goals. I deposited each payment into an account she didn't know existed, watching it grow along with my pride in her consistency. She was promoted at work, given more responsibility, asked to train new counselors. She started leading workshops at her church about breaking cycles of financial trauma. She mentored young women coming out of the prison system, offering them the kind of support she desperately needed, but had to fight to accept. One Saturday afternoon in May, 3 years after her graduation, Jessica called and asked if she could come over. She had something important to discuss. My first reaction was still a flicker of anxiety, that old protective instinct wondering what crisis was brewing. But I pushed it aside and told her to come by any time. She arrived looking nervous, carrying a folder and a small gift bag. We sat in my living room, the same space where we'd had so many difficult conversations, so many moments of confrontation and reconciliation. Mom, I need to tell you something, she began, and my heart started pounding despite my best efforts to stay calm. I met someone. His name is Marcus. He's a social worker at the shelter where I volunteer. We've been seeing each other for about 6 months. My relief was almost comical. I'd been bracing for disaster and she was telling me about a relationship. That's wonderful, Jessica. Why do you look so worried about telling me? Because I wanted to make sure I wasn't falling into old patterns, she said. I wanted to be certain I was choosing someone for the right reasons, not because of what he could give me or how he made me look. I've been going slow, being honest with him about my past, making sure we're building something real. I like him already, I said, and she laughed with relief. There's more, she continued. We've been talking about getting married eventually. Not soon, we're taking our time, but we're heading in that direction. And Mom, I wanted to ask you something. She opened the folder and pulled out a budget spreadsheet. When Marcus and I do get married, we want a small ceremony. Maybe 30 people, somewhere simple, nothing extravagant. I've been saving money specifically for it, and I wanted to show you my plan to make sure I'm being realistic and responsible. I looked at the spreadsheet, meticulously detailed with estimated costs for a simple wedding at a local garden, a small reception at a community hall, modest flowers and a cake from a local bakery. The total budget was $8,000. All of which she'd saved or planned to save over the next year. It was the exact opposite of the fantasy wedding that had nearly destroyed her life. This is beautiful, Jessica, I said. It's thoughtful and realistic and absolutely perfect. She looked relieved. I needed you to see that I've learned. That I understand the difference between a wedding that's about showing off and a wedding that's about celebrating real love with people who actually matter. Then she handed me the gift bag. What's this? I asked. Open it, she said, smiling through nervous tears. Inside was a small box, and inside that was a delicate silver bracelet engraved with a simple phrase. To the mother who saved me by letting me fall. I started crying immediately. Jessica took the bracelet from my trembling hands and fastened it around my wrist. When I do get married, she said softly, I want you there. Not as someone who paid for it or made it possible, but as my mother. As the most important person in my life. as the woman who loved me enough to enforce boundaries when I needed them most. We held each other and cried, and I felt something I hadn't felt in over a decade. Complete peace about my relationship with my daughter. No fear, no waiting for betrayal, no protective walls. Just love and trust and hope for whatever came next. The healing had taken years of painful work from both of us, but it had been worth every difficult moment. Several months later, Marcus came to my apartment for dinner. Jessica had warned him I might be intimidating, that I'd been through a lot and would be evaluating him carefully. He arrived with flowers and a sincere handshake, looking nervous but determined. Over my famous pot roast, I watched how he and Jessica interacted. He was kind without being patronizing, supportive without being controlling. When Jessica mentioned a difficult client situation at work, he listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions rather than trying to fix it for her. When she talked about her past mistakes, he didn't flinch or judge, just acknowledged them as part of her journey. Most importantly, when the subject of money came up, he treated it as something to be managed together with transparency and honesty rather than a source of status or shame. After dinner, Marcus asked if he could speak with me privately. Jessica went to the kitchen to make coffee while he and I sat in the living room. "Mrs. Cole," he began, "I know I'm not here to ask for your blessing to marry Jessica because she's her own person and makes her own choices. But I wanted you to know that I understand what you've been through with her, and I have enormous respect for how you handled it." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I love Jessica for who she is now, including the difficult path she took to get here. I'm not interested in changing her or controlling her. I want to build a life with her based on honesty and partnership. And I wanted you to know that I'll never enable the pattern she's worked so hard to break. If she ever starts slipping, I'll encourage her to reach out to you and her support system rather than trying to hide it." "You love her," I said. It wasn't a question. "I do," he said simply. "She's the strongest person I've ever met, and I'm honored she's chosen to share her life with me." I believed him. More than that, I could see that Jessica had chosen someone who complemented her growth rather than threatened it. Someone who saw her clearly and loved what he saw. That's all any mother could ask for her child. The wedding happened the following spring in exactly the way Jessica had planned. A simple ceremony in a botanical garden with 30 guests who actually knew and cared about the couple. I wore a soft blue dress and the bracelet Jessica had given me. Rachel was the maid of honor, and Marcus's brother stood as best man. There was no wedding planner, no elaborate decorations, no attempt to impress anyone. Just two people who loved each other making promises in front of the people who mattered most. When Jessica walked down the short aisle on my arm, I felt my heart might burst. This was the moment I dreamed of when she was a little girl, but I'd thought it was lost forever. The fact that we'd found our way back to each other, that she'd become someone I could walk beside with pride and joy, felt like a miracle. Jessica had written her own vows, and when she spoke them, she looked at Marcus with complete honesty. "I promised to build our life together on truth, not fantasy. To share my struggles rather than hide them. To value what's real over what looks good. To choose you every day not because you make me feel important, but because you help me be genuine." Marcus's vows were equally moving, and when they kissed as married couple, the applause from our small gathering was genuine and warm. The reception was held at a community center decorated with simple flowers and string lights. Instead of an expensive catered dinner, we had a potluck where everyone contributed their favorite dish. Instead of a DJ, we had a playlist of meaningful songs. Instead of expensive alcohol, we had homemade lemonade and sweet tea. It was perfect. It was real. It was everything the $80,000 fantasy wedding could never have been. During her toast, Jessica asked for everyone's attention. She stood with Marcus's hand in hers and looked directly at me. "I need to say something to my mother," she began. "Mom, 6 years ago I asked you to fund a wedding you weren't invited to. I tried to use you as an ATM to finance a lie. You said no, and in doing so, you gave me the greatest gift you could have given me. The chance to hit bottom and rebuild myself into someone real." She paused, tears streaming down her face. "This wedding cost $8,000 that Marcus and I saved together through honest work. Every flower, every piece of cake, every decoration represents a choice we made to build something authentic, rather than impressive. And having you here, walking me down the aisle, celebrating with us not as a financier but as my mother, That's worth more than any amount of money could ever buy." The room erupted in applause, and I stood to hug my daughter while everyone cheered. Later that evening, as the party wound down and guests began to leave, Jessica pulled me aside. "I have something for you," she said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a check for $15,000, the exact amount she'd calculated that she owed me from all those years ago. "Mom, I paid you back the last installment this week," she said. "This represents every dollar I cost you, paid back through 4 years of monthly payments. I wanted to give it to you today to show you that I keep my promises. I'm someone you can count on now." I looked at the check, then at my daughter's face, radiant with honest pride in what she'd accomplished. Then I tore the check in half. Jessica gasped. "Mom, what are you doing?" I pulled out my checkbook and wrote a new check, this one for $30,000. The $15,000 she'd paid me back over 4 years, plus an additional $15,000 I'd been saving separately. "This is your wedding gift," I said, handing it to her and Marcus. "Not to fund a fantasy or enable bad choices, but to help you build a real life together. A down payment on a house, a cushion for emergencies, whatever you need to start your marriage on solid ground. You've earned this through years of hard work and genuine change." Jessica stared at the check, then at me, tears flowing freely now. "I can't take this," she whispered. "Yes, you can," I said firmly. "Because this isn't about what you deserve or what you're owed. This is about me choosing to invest in the beautiful life you're building. The life you earned through your own effort and honesty. You're not the same person who asked me for money 6 years ago, and I'm not the same person who said no. We've both grown, both changed. Let me celebrate that by helping you start this new chapter." Marcus put his arm around Jessica as she sobbed, and I saw understanding in his eyes. He knew what this meant, how far we'd both come to reach this moment. As I drove home that night, the wedding bracelet glinting on my wrist under the streetlights, I reflected on the long, painful journey that had brought us here. The betrayal and heartbreak, the boundaries and consequences, the slow rebuilding of trust through consistent action. I thought about the daughter I'd lost and the woman I'd gained, and I realized that sometimes love means letting people fall, so they can learn to stand on their own. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the space to fail and the refusal to rescue them from their own choices. Jessica had needed to lose everything to discover what actually mattered. She'd needed to face the full weight of her actions without a safety net to catch her. And I'd needed to learn that being a good mother didn't mean sacrificing myself endlessly, but rather teaching through boundaries what words had failed to convey. Our story could have ended in permanent estrangement, with Jessica lost to her addictions and lies, with me bitter and broken from years of enabling. Instead, it became a story of redemption, of genuine transformation, of love that evolved from blind devotion into something stronger and more honest. I still wear the bracelet Jessica gave me every day. It reminds me that sometimes saving someone means refusing to save them, and that the hardest love is often the truest love. My daughter had refused to invite me to a wedding and asked me to pay $80,000 for the privilege of being excluded. But through that betrayal and the painful years that followed, we'd both found something more valuable than any amount of money. We'd found ourselves, and in doing so, we'd found each other. Not as mother and dependent child, but as two women who respected each other, supported each other, and loved each other with clear eyes and open hearts. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.